My wife left me for her affair partner, expecting my family's money. But she was in for a surprise. Hey, everyone! I've kept this story to myself for a while, but I think it's time to put it all out there. It's a wild ride, and honestly, I still can't believe it happened. So here's the whole story. For some background, my name's Matt. I'm 32, and my life's been interesting, to say the least. I grew up pretty comfortably because my parents had set up a huge trust fund for me. I know that might make it sound like everything was just handed to me, but my parents didn't let me become a rich kid. My dad built his business from scratch, and he always reminded me that money doesn't grow on trees. Thanks to him, I learned to work hard and earn my way. Now, I work at my dad's company, trying to keep things running as he would have wanted. Because of this trust fund, people in my social circles have always seen me as the rich kid. They assumed I'd be throwing wild parties or flaunting cash, but that wasn't me. I worked hard, kept my head down, and avoided anyone who seemed interested in just my family's money. But this story isn't really about money, it's about my ex-wife, Sarah. Back in college, I wasn't exactly dating around. I wanted something real, and honestly, it felt like most people were more interested in my background than in me. Then I met Sarah. We met at a party, and it was like she didn't know anything about my family or money. She was down to earth, easy to talk to, and just different. Our first date was at McDonald's. Yeah, I know, not exactly fine dining, but she didn't care, and we had a great time just laughing and talking. She didn't give off any gold digger vibes or try to impress me. It felt natural and real, and I fell for her quickly. After about a year, I was head over heels for her. She was the first girl I'd ever brought home to meet my parents, which was a big deal. My parents loved her. They thought she was smart, funny, and grounded. She even turned down expensive gifts, saying those things could wait until we were married. Looking back, that should have been a red flag, but I didn't see it then. To me, she was perfect. After another year, we got married. My parents threw a huge wedding party for us, and everything felt like a dream. They even wanted to add Sarah to my trust fund as a beneficiary, which was a big deal. She just nodded and thanked them calmly. Now I realize she probably knew about my family's money way before I ever mentioned it. She might have had a plan all along. We were married for about 6 years. During that time, Sarah was the perfect wife. She got along great with my parents, came to every family event, and made us look like a happy, strong couple. From the outside, it looked like we had it all: good jobs, a nice house, and a stable life. But about a year ago, things began to change. At first, it was just little things. Sarah started traveling more for work. She'd always traveled, but now it felt like she was gone every other week. I didn't think much of it. I trusted her and figured she was just busy. But things really took a turn when my parents passed away, one after the other, within 6 months. Losing them so quickly was devastating, and I didn't know how to handle it. I threw myself into work, taking over the business, and trying to keep my emotions in check. Meanwhile, Sarah felt distant, and though I thought it was because she was grieving too, she didn't ask once how I was doing. 2 weeks after my mom's funeral, I decided to come home early from work and talk to Sarah. I wanted us to go on a little trip together to reconnect and escape the stress. I even bought her roses to surprise her, hoping to bring some light back into our relationship. But when I walked into the house, I found Nick, her boss, sitting in the living room with his bags packed. I thought maybe they were meeting about work, but then Sarah came out with 2 suitcases of her own. She looked right at me and said, "I was going to leave a note, but I guess this works. I'm leaving you, Matt. Nick and I are going to Italy, and I'll be filing for divorce." Don't worry, your parents made sure I'll be taken care of. Then, just like that, she walked out. I was left standing there, holding roses, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. That night, I didn't do anything. I was too shocked to even move. For a few days, I was in disbelief, but I couldn't sit in silence forever. I needed answers. So I reached out to one of Sarah's close friends, Megan, hoping she'd know what was going on. She hesitated, but finally admitted that Sarah and Nick had been together for a year. A whole year? I was stunned. I asked Megan if the trust fund had been part of Sarah's plan all along. Megan hesitated, then said Sarah had mentioned it a few times. It all made sense now. Sarah had probably known about my family's money from the beginning. The funny part? When she came back from her Italy trip, expecting to cash in on my family's fortune, she got a rude awakening. My parents had adjusted the trust fund so she wouldn't get a cent. The look on her face when she found out? Priceless. Now, I'm just grateful to be free of her lies and manipulation. She really thought she'd be set, you know? Even after the divorce, she was acting like she could just waltz away with a chunk of my parents' money, as if all the damage she caused didn't matter. I hung up the phone. I didn't need to hear any more. A whole year of my life gone wasted on someone who didn't care enough to be honest with me. But she wasn't going to get away with it. Not if I could help it. I felt that mix of anger and relief that comes when you finally see someone for who they are. But anger alone wouldn't stop her. If she thought she'd just take that money my parents worked their entire lives to build, she was about to get a reality check. So I started making calls. First, I called a lawyer. I needed to understand my options. I wasn't going to sit back and let her get away with this. The lawyer listened carefully, assured me that we'd work out the best strategy to protect my assets, and helped me see where I stood legally. Next, I called Alan, my parents' financial advisor, who'd been a family friend for years. Alan didn't waste time sugarcoating things, which I appreciated. When I explained the situation, he was blunt. Look, Sarah isn't entitled to a single cent. Your parents set up that trust fund specifically for you. It's secure. A weight lifted off my shoulders when he said that. Finally, something was going my way. Knowing the trust was protected gave me hope and determination. I wasn't completely screwed after all. So, I met with my lawyer, who outlined all the paperwork and took steps to officially cut Sarah off from any access to my finances. By the end of the week, I had a plan in place. If Sarah wanted a fight, I was ready to give her one. A few days later, though, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang, but it wasn't the loud, insistent ringing that had been so common since Sarah left. This was just one quiet chime. I answered it, expecting maybe a package or something routine, but standing there was Hannah, Nick's wife. Her face looked as worn down as I felt inside. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I didn't know what to say. I mean, what do you say to the wife of the man your wife ran off with? Before I could get a word out, she stepped inside, moving like she'd been here 1,000 times. She dropped down onto my couch, looked me in the eye, and said, "We need to talk." I sat down across from her, surprised at the way she seemed to hold herself together, even though she looked as wrecked as I felt. "I know what they've been doing," she said, her voice low but steady. "Sarah and Nick. I figured it out months ago." I didn't want to believe it at first, but now I have all the proof I need. She sounded calm, but the determination in her voice made it clear. She was ready to make them pay. She explained how she had first gotten suspicious when Nick started coming home late, blaming work every time. He made excuse after excuse, but when she saw charges on their joint credit card, fancy hotels, high-end dinners, her gut told her something was off. She confronted him, but he brushed it all off as business expenses. That's when she decided to dig deeper. She checked his phone, his emails, and it was all there. Photos, texts, all the proof she needed to know that he and Sarah had been sneaking around for months. She showed me a few of their messages. Nick was talking about how passionate his relationship with Sarah was, going on and on about how she understood him. Sarah, meanwhile, was whining about me working too much, saying she felt neglected. Reading those texts felt like watching a cliché romance novel unfold, except this one was blowing up my life. A part of me wanted to ask Hannah why she hadn't told me sooner, but I already knew the answer. Who wants to admit that their partner is cheating on them? Would I have been ready to hear it even if she had? Probably not. After a minute of silence, Hannah looked at me, fire in her eyes. We need to do something. They can't just get away with this. And for the first time, I felt that fire too. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Nick walk away unscathed. We both knew they were expecting to come back from their little Italian getaway and continue life without facing any real consequences. Not on our watch. I told Hannah about the trust fund and how Sarah thought she'd get access to it. Hannah laughed a bitter laugh, but there was strength in it. They think they're smarter than us. They think they can just waltz back and we'll roll over. But they're in for a surprise. We're not going to make this easy for them. She was ready for war, and I could see that she wasn't just angry, she was driven. She had a lawyer already working on her case, and she was determined to block Nick from getting anything from her. She even suggested digging into Nick's business finances to see if there was anything shady we could use against him. Hannah wasn't just out for revenge, she wanted justice. And so did I. After Hannah left, I sat there alone, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of control. I wasn't just the guy who got left behind anymore. I was finally doing something, taking charge of my own life. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but one thing was clear. Sarah and Nick had messed with the wrong people. They thought they could fool us, but they were in for a rude awakening. A few days later, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I looked down and saw Nick's name pop up. My first thought was that it was some kind of sick joke. Why would this guy be calling me? Had he accidentally dialed my number? I almost ignored it, but then curiosity got the better of me. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and picked up. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as I could. There was a pause on the other end. Then Nick's voice came through, all casual, like we were old friends catching up. I had just gotten home and was finally relaxing when the call came. It was Nick, the guy who'd been sneaking around with my wife, Sarah. Now he wanted to clear the air, as if a few words would fix things. I almost laughed at the nerve of it. This was the guy who had stolen my wife, ripped my life apart, and he wanted to chat? But I bit my tongue, waiting to hear what he had to say. "Hey Matt, man. I know things have been tense, but I just want you to know with Sarah and me, it wasn't personal. It just happened." His voice was slimy, fake. He tried to sound sincere, but his apology felt like another slap in the face. I couldn't hold back any longer. "Not personal? You're sleeping with my wife, Nick. How is that not personal?" He hesitated, giving an awkward chuckle before brushing off my anger. "Look, man, I get it. You're upset. But let's not make this harder than it has to be, all right? Sarah and I, we're serious. I think it'd be best if we all just moved on." I wanted to punch something. The audacity of this guy, acting like I was the one being difficult. I forced myself to stay calm and replied with a cold smile he couldn't see. "Oh, don't worry, Nick. I'm moving on. In fact, my lawyer is already handling things. And here's a little heads up. Sarah's not getting a dime, and neither are you." That caught him off guard. He stumbled over his words, managing a confused, "Wait, what? What do you mean?" Sarah said. "She was wrong," I cut in. "My parents didn't leave their money to fund you two running off to Italy together. The trust fund is protected, and you can tell Sarah she can kiss it goodbye." For a moment, he went silent, probably stunned by what I'd just dropped on him. Then, without another word, he hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone, half expecting him to call back with some desperate response. But he didn't. He'd realized the gravy train was over. A strange mix of feelings swirled in me: satisfaction, yes, but mostly just exhaustion. This mess wasn't anywhere near resolved. Sarah hadn't even faced me yet. That showdown was coming, and I wasn't looking forward to it. But at least now, I had leverage. They couldn't just stomp all over me and think they'd get away unscathed. That night, I got a text from Hannah, my cousin. She'd heard through her lawyer that Nick was starting to panic, realizing he'd counted on that trust fund to cover his and Sarah's mounting debts. Knowing his plans were falling apart gave me a little satisfaction. Sure, it might be petty, but after everything he'd put me through, it felt good to know his life wasn't about to get any easier. Still, a weird emptiness gnawed at me. I was more than just angry, I was tired. Tired of the drama, the lies, the betrayal. I didn't want my whole life to be defined by this mess. I wanted to move on. But I knew the real storm was still coming. 2 days later, on Monday morning, I got a text from Sarah. "We need to talk." I knew it was coming, but seeing those words hit me hard. I'd braced myself for this moment, but no amount of preparation could make it easy. I didn't reply right away. I wanted to keep the upper hand, and honestly, I didn't feel like giving her the satisfaction of knowing how much it bothered me. Instead, I went to work, trying to focus like I wasn't gearing up for one of the most difficult conversations of my life. But when I got home that night, she was there, sitting in her car outside my house, as if she had every right to be there. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and for a second, it felt surreal. There she was, the woman I'd thought I'd spend my life with, the woman who'd left me, right there on my driveway. For a second, I almost expected her to get out of the car, say it was all some big mistake, that she was sorry, that she wanted to fix things. Then reality hit, and I remembered exactly what she'd done. I parked, took a deep breath, and got out of the car. She stepped out too, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She was trying to look calm, like she was in control, but her hands shook, her face pale. She was rattled, and I knew exactly why. "Matt," she said, walking toward me, "we really need to talk." I didn't say anything right away. I leaned against my car, arms crossed, letting her make the first move. I could tell she didn't like that. She was used to me being the one to fix things, to smooth things over, but not this time. After a long pause, she blurted, "I know you've been talking to a lawyer." I raised an eyebrow, not offering her anything. She stepped closer, her voice more desperate now. "Matt, this doesn't have to go down like this. We don't need to drag lawyers into this." I laughed, a cold, hard sound. "I'm not the one who dragged lawyers into this, Sarah. You left. You made that choice. Now you're going to have to live with it." Her face softened, and her voice was pleading. "I didn't want it to be like this. I still care about you, Matt, but I wasn't happy. You were always working." I felt so alone. My anger flared, but I held it in. "And instead of talking to me, you ran off with Nick?" She looked down, face flushed. "It wasn't like that." It just happened. Just happened? I scoffed. You've been with him for a year, Sarah. Don't pretend this was some accident. There was a long pause before she finally got to the real reason she was here. I know about the trust fund, she said, trying to sound firm. Your parents set it up for us. I'm still entitled to my share. That was it. I snapped, my voice cold. You're not getting a dime, Sarah. That trust was never for you, it was for me. My lawyers already ensured you won't see a cent. Her eyes went wide, genuine shock on her face. She'd banked on that money, counting on it like a safety net. Matt, you can't do that. I gave you years of my life. You can't just cut me out. I stood up straight, looking her dead in the eye. You made your bed, Sarah. Now lie in it. She flinched, but didn't give up. Her voice broke as she said, Please, Matt. I don't know what to do. Nick's job isn't stable, and we have debts. I need your help. It was all so clear now she wasn't here to fix anything, to make amends. She was desperate for a bailout. I felt a pang of guilt, but I shut it down. I'm sorry you're struggling, Sarah, I said, my voice steely. But that's not my problem anymore. Her tears fell, but I wasn't moved. I watched her turn and walk back to her car, shoulders slumped. As she drove off, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Relief. This wasn't the victory I thought it would be. There was no big moment of triumph. Just the calm of finally being done with it all. I was free.